Whether you're looking for answers to specific life questions or simply hoping to become the best version of you possible, welcome to the Mental Breakdown and Psychreg podcast, where we offer insight, information, and strategies based upon research and years of practice as psychologists. So sit back, have a listen, and get connected with our hosts, Dr. Berney Wilkinson and Dr. Richard Marshall. Welcome back. Richard, this week we're going to talk about technology, but everything that we're going to talk about this week comes from a massive, it is a big article in
it's about a 24-minute read
Medium.
Or something.
Yeah, they don't say how many pages it is. They tell about how long it will take you to read it.
Right.
And so 24-minute read. It's a long
article.
Long article from Medium entitled "The Tech Industry's War on Kids," and it's written by a psychologist.
Interestingly, and for a good reason.
Yes, and so we're gonna go through different aspects of this article because we were initially going to do it as just one big podcast.
Right.
But as we were going through it, man, there's like so many details that it would just be great to talk about each of the details and spread it out over the week. So
because there's so much in this, and just to tell the viewers and the listeners that we're going to spend, although it's a long article, we're going to spend the whole week discussing this one. So read it once, you may want to read it again, and you may want to go to some of the other, they're not links, but they're references that he makes to other articles, and you may want to go to some of those. I'm a little bit nervous about this week's podcast because we're going to enter that field of what's real. This whole internet business, there's two very large sides to it. There are the producers, of content, and then there's the consumers of content. And in our business, we tend to focus on the consumers because we have parents who talk almost every day. Somebody comes in and says, my child is addicted to or to video games or to cell phone or to social media. And so we're dealing with it mainly from a consumer side. However, there's a whole world of producers out there. And that's what Fried is his name, right? Richard Fried.
Dr. Richard Fried.
Right. That's what he's talking about here. He's talking more about what's going on the producer side of social media.
Yeah.
And when you get into that, you get into some fairly controversial topics. So there are some controversial topics that we're going to be discussing this week.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to it, but with some trepidation.
Right. Yeah. The subtitle of the article is "How Psychology is Being Used as a Weapon Against Children," and so I think that was the part that really hooked me into this article because it is a fascinating topic.
It's a fascinating world that I don't know much about.
Yeah.
My brother sent me a whole series of posts by a guy by the name of, I think it's Jim or John Lanier, Lanier, one of the founders of virtual reality. And he talks about some of these issues as well. So there's a great deal to consider. And especially if you're a user yourself or you have children who are using or beginning to use, this is going to be of interest to you.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So
this whole week.
He starts out the article with a great case study from his office, and it's the short story is Kelly is a pseudonym for not pseudonym. It's a name, not her real name. It's what is the word? What word am I looking for?
You got me.
A made up name.
Pseudonym.
Is it a pseudonym?
Yeah.
Okay, so a pseudonym for a patient, but it's
You're smarter than even you think.
I know. Sometimes I just amaze myself.
It's
like that must be the right word.
It's got to be. If I thought it.
Yeah,
right.
I think it's sitting next to you.
That didn't do any good.
Trepidation.
Absorb something
with trepidation.
You get some osmosis.
But he starts out with the story about Kelly, who was a patient.
It's a wonderful story.
It is
because it's so classic.
Yeah, because we've seen people like Kelly in our office.
In my living room. At home. Yes, I've seen Kelly lives with me.
Yeah, so the big thing is that Kelly's parents are trying to manage some things with her, and they take away her cell phone. And
why did they take it? They took it because her grades were dropping.
Right.
She was isolating herself in her room. She was becoming short-tempered with them. She wouldn't have anything to do with the family. All of the things that parents are concerned about when their children seem to be too absorbed in these devices.
Which is why we're talking today about the unhealthy attachment.
Right.
Because there is we're going to deal with the whole topic of addiction later this week. Because I think that's a separate... I was listening to a podcast this past week, over the last couple of days, where they were talking about addiction, and I liked a couple of things that they said, but I will save that for later this week. But when we think about the unhealthy attachment, we're thinking about this connection, this need, this drive for people, kids, primarily kids and teenagers, to be connected. Not necessarily with other people through social media, but that is absolutely part of it. But certainly with some, as it relates to video games and just technology in general, watching YouTube videos and things like that. And so we have this unhealthy attachment to all things technology.
Right. As psychologists, all psychologists know something about addiction. It's one of those courses you're required to take. Some people know much more than others. But as you watch people in their relationship with these devices, whether it's adults sitting across the table texting, not talking to each other, I'll talk about that, or it's teenagers or young children texting instead of talking, you get the feeling, and certainly parents have had the feeling, you get the feeling that there's something extraordinarily compulsive about the use of these devices in children and in adults. And we frequently do hear parents come in and say, she's addicted to her cell phone, he's addicted to video games. And we've always sort of suspected that there's some obsessive use of these devices. And that's what this article is about, because what happened with this girl, Kelly, is what's happening to many kids. She got her first phone at 14, and she's part of iGen, the iGeneration, who don't have any history before the internet. They only know a world with the internet. And so she's part of that generation that grew up with these things. And it was the downward spiral that concerned her parents, that she became so obsessed with the cell phone, in her case it was a cell phone, and social media, that she began to disengage from all other aspects of her life. She had started as an A student. She was suddenly getting Fs. She started as a personable young kid, suddenly a sullen teenager who wants to be private. And when her parents finally stepped in about sleep, and you and I have talked about that many times, that when she took the phone to bed and she was staying up too late at night and it was interfering with sleep, that's when they decided to take it. When they took it, the explosion occurred. She went ballistic. And that's exactly what alcoholics do. If you go in and you take their drugs or you take their alcohol, they most often react aggressively, even violently, because you've taken away the most important thing in their lives. And that's what she did with this phone. And so what is it about these devices? We've always suspected that there's an obsessive or maybe an addictive quality. You mentioned at one time in a podcast months ago that it's really not an addiction. It's more of a... It's an attack. You use some other word, that it's a obsession, maybe, or But you didn't feel that it was really an addiction, right? And that's why we have to be careful, because is it really an addiction? And some countries now do include this as a mental illness, and DSM-5 is thinking about adding it as a cell phone addiction, or I guess technology addiction, And so we're entering this world of addiction, and that is kind of what it looks like. And I think Kelly's probably a good representative, the poster child for what happens to kids.
So when we think about this unhealthy attachment, we certainly have this scenario, and it's not as clean as a lot of people will think it is, but you tend to have the idea of, or the experience of many who are very connected to social media. You have some who are very connected to video games, and video games as a social construct because they play online with other people. And, I've certainly heard people say, well, those are my only friends.
This is my social life.
That is their social life, is playing, Fortnite or whatever online. And then you have another group who, are absolutely connected to their video games, but they play by themselves. They just play, campaign mode at home by themselves, and they're not. There's no social aspect to their video gaming. They just play the video games by themselves.
Right.
And so you have this. And we tend to think of primarily kids and especially teenagers as it relates to this, but there are certainly adults who do the same thing.
There are, yeah.
And throughout the week, we're going to be talking about the way in which the tech industry sort of fosters this. They very ingeniously, they use different techniques to keep you engaged.
And that's the subtitle, is that psychology, which had traditionally been a helping profession, I mean, that's how it's typically seen as a helping profession, is now being used, I hate to even say this, is now being used to hook us into technology.
Right.
And it's not, as I suspected, it's not accidental. This is planned and orchestrated. And there's a strange marriage that has occurred. Dwight Eisenhower talked about the military-industrial complex. There is a strange marriage between psychology and technology today, because the technology producers are using psychological, well-documented psychological principles to keep us hooked on these devices.
Yeah. When I read through this article and just think about this whole idea, the very first time that I heard or even thought about this, and I don't know that I thought about it really at that time, but I think I did, but I don't know, because it was so long ago. Early 90s, all right? In the early 1990s, there a movie came out, and I don't know if you saw the movie, but Wayne's World, right?
I know about Wayne's World.
Oh my gosh, that's great.
I do.
So in Wayne's World, if you remember when they got kind of connected to this big broadcast company and everything, and they got money and everything, they had a sponsor, a Noah's Arcade. Remember that? And he's talking about this new game, and he's saying, kids, he said, those stupid kids, they'll come in and they'll put their coins in and they'll play, and they'll get as far as they can, and then they will, keep pumping in those quarters just to get to the next level. And he says, and the secret is, there is no next level. There's no way for them to get to the next level.
Right.
But they don't know that. They just keep pumping in the quarters. And I think about that I thought about that when I was reading this article, that, we're using these techniques, the same techniques that's used in slot machines, that the same idea with, loot bags and, gifts and things that you can do if you achieve these different missions and badges and all this kind of stuff that you can get. All of that stuff is there just to keep you connected and keep you engaged, because you know what? Hey, if you, when somebody messages you, if you respond, within this amount of time, you get a gold badge for, quick responding. Or if you get this or that, the number of friends that you have, of course, is always, or followers or friends, or, all of that stuff is sort of quantified so that you can compare yourself to somebody else.
I'm going to have to write this down because I'm trying to think of exactly what order I'm going to put these sentences, but I'll give it a try now. If you, these devices and the software programs would not on their own be obsessive.
Right.
This is planned.
Yes.
Designers and developers, producers of content, are using well-documented psychological principles, and they embed them in these devices. You mentioned the video game. Okay. There's something about being reinforced, not every time you do something, but on occasion. We call it intermittent reinforcement. That is the strongest type of reinforcement. It's what brings you back. That's why slot machines are so so addictive.
Right.
So
because you don't know when it will happen, you just know it will.
You know it will. That psychological principle has been embedded into video games, okay, because you don't win every time. The second thing about video games is when boys play video games, when you lose, nobody knows you're losing.
Right.
You can talk about your winnings. It's like the gambler. I had a neighbor one time who went to, I think he bet on horses or something. No, he went to casinos, and he would always talk about his winnings. Never talked about his losings because they were private. Nobody. When you're at a slot machine, nobody knows but you. You can always talk about your winnings.
Right.
People don't talk about their losings. The nice thing about video games is you win and you can announce how you've won, and you don't have to admit.
Right.
Where if you're playing in an athletic contest, your wins and your losses are both calculated. They're both public. Okay, so these are known psychological principles that developers are now putting into these devices. So when parents say she looks like she's addicted, she might very well be, because the device is designed with the help of psychologists to be addictive.
Right.
It's not accidental. It's not serendipitous. It was planned that way.
Yeah.
And I'd hate to sound like a conspiratorial historian, but it is designed in the system.
Sure. And it's the same, I think it's the same thing that, fast food restaurants use to get people to, the whole idea of that we see with MSG and some other food additives, because they keep you wanting to eat more.
You remember
that whole thing with Doritos? Was it Doritos that you just can't eat one?
Lay's.
Lay's. That wasn't just a clever advertising. I mean, there's things about that kind of food that makes you want to keep eating more.
You wonder what they put in. We laugh all the time. You know, somebody gets something, oh, this is so good. It's like crack. But you begin to wonder after a while, why are these things, why do I keep eating these things?
I mean, it's just a potato. You're not going to keep eating a baked potato.
Yeah, you wouldn't keep biting into a potato.
Right.
There's something about those. And you remember the tobacco industry was accused of increasing the amount of nicotine. They actually added nicotine because we know how addictive nicotine is. And so and whether they did or not, I don't know. Right. But to make the cigarette even more addictive, okay? And this is exactly what's happening with digital media right now, is that every effort is being made to make them as obsessive as possible, to keep you there, to keep you on that screen.
Right. Yeah. So this week we're going to be talking a lot about these things, and all of the podcasts this week won't be as long as this one, hopefully, but we're going to be focusing on different aspects of all of this stuff throughout the course of the week. And so, certainly come back and listen to those and share with us. If you have thoughts or impressions about it, we'd love to hear from you.
Right.
Because there's a lot to be said about the influence of technology on our lives.
And all those suspicions that parents have had or spouses have had that, my spouse seems, like you hear men say, man, my husband seems to just be addicted to this stuff. Or boys now who grew up on video games are becoming men, but they continue to play them. And wives will complain, or husbands will complain that their wives are spending more time on Facebook than they are doing anything else.
Right.
And this feeling, this intuition that you have that Jesus looks addictive, there may be something to that.
Yeah.
So we want to explore that for the rest of this week.
Absolutely. Okay. So that's it for today. Until next time, stay happy, stay healthy, and forget to be afraid. Thanks for sharing this episode of the Mental Breakdown and Psychreg podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to follow us on Twitter and subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you will find all of our previous podcasts and much more. We would be honored if you would become a patron through patreon.com, where any donation you can manage will go to the development and creation of more content. Just visit patreon.com/thementalbreakdown for more information. Thanks again for listening. Have an awesome day, and we look forward to being back in your feed tomorrow morning.